Okay, so in today's video we're going to create this part here called the bearing from a project that my students are completing. So I'm going to move that over to my other screen. But this is a good piece because you learn a few different skills, and if we think about this piece a little bit, there's a couple different ways we can approach it. So first I'm going to start my part, I'm going to hit new, and then I gave a specific number for this part for my students. You can certainly name it whatever you like. 20,001-02 is the name of the part that I gave them. So we're going to hit OK. Make sure we have our datum planes on, and then we can get started on this thing. So the first thing is, if we look at this piece, there's a revolve feature around there. A revolve feature around, and then we have a couple patterns. There's a pattern for these holes with the counterbores. There's also a pattern for these ribs right here. There's 3 of each, and they're kind of inverse to each other. The holes sit in between the ribs. So the first thing that I see right away is this section, the sort of L-shaped section, makes a really nice revolve for our first feature. So we're going to hit revolve, hold right click, hit define internal sketch. I'm going to do this the shortcut way, the way I would approach this, because I think this is a part we can complete in probably 10 to 15 minutes. So define internal sketch. I'm going to find my right plane because I want to orient it the way that the picture showed it. Just because I'm not familiar with how the piece is assembled to something else. These are just 6 random parts that I got from some books that I have. So I'm going to pick my right plane, and then I'm going to hit sketch, and I'm going to rotate it so I look directly at my sketch view. You can hit that button if your config doesn't automatically do that. And then I'm going to grab a center line, and I'm going to put that center line right across my horizontal. Then from here, I'm going to create that L-shaped section. So I'm going to start on my center line. I'm going to go up, make sure I get a nice vertical line, over, up, over, down. I'm going to close my L shape. Ooh, and you know what? I actually approached that the wrong way, so let me undo that. This actually needs to start away from my center line because there's a hole down the middle. We all make mistakes. I'm going to go up, over, down, over till I line up, and close that up. Okay, and I could have done it the way I did it and then created a hole through the middle, or put a line and done some trimming. But it's kind of nice if you already have the center line. It's going to give you a bunch of diameters to start. And there's no reason we can't put that hole in the same feature. It's not going to limit us in some way. But since we put that center line in, and this is a simple sketch, we kind of get all the dimensions that we actually want. So since these are all huge right now, the way I like to start is draw a big window around everything. Hold right click, go to your modify command right here, and then lock your scale. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on one of these dimensions, double click it, it's going to highlight one of your dimensions. And then if we look at this piece, the dimension that I highlighted is this hole through the center here, all right, which is 1 inch. But you could highlight any of them. If the one that doesn't highlight isn't the one that's in the middle, I can always click in another place till I find it. But let's base it on this hole here. So find the box in your list that highlights this dimension, and then let's make it 1 and hit enter and hit OK. And then we can hit this refit. I'll zoom in, and now we're a heck of a lot closer to the sizes we actually want. And I'm going to turn my datum planes off just to make it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. So I have this at 1. If those dimensions didn't show up for you, if you need to create a diameter dimension, it's very simple. Dimension, I pick the line I want a dimension to, then the center line, and then I go back to that line to get a diameter. And then when I middle click, it's going to give me a diameter like that. Now obviously I already had that, so I'm just going to undo that. But that's the way you do it. You're simulating going from one side of the circle to the center, then to the other side, which is what a diameter is. So this outside diameter here is 2 inches. This length is 3. My thickness is 0.5. Should probably zoom in and make sure I don't give any wrong dimensions here. 0.5, and then my overall diameter of the back is 4.25, 4.25. So there's my shape that I should have. If I want to move these around for when I make a drawing later, I could. I'm going to hit my checkbox, and it's going to rotate my piece around. That looks great. And I can middle click or hit the checkbox and say that's okay. I'm just going to go back to my standard orientation. Then from here, I'm probably going to, well, you know what, let's create the ribs first because that's a handy feature to learn. So for me, I really like the profile rib personally. We could do this with either of them, but the profile rib is going to be an easier way to do it. So let's go profile rib, and then we're going to turn on our planes. And for my first rib, I'm going to put it right in line with this right datum plane. So let's pick right. It's going to rotate, and the key for ribs is that you want to create references first. Now actually, now that I'm looking at this piece, I'm seeing, and you know, this is kind of the thought process you go through. You may take one approach and then decide you want to take another one. I notice that this round is actually overlapping with my rib to the point where my rib needs to be kind of tangent to it. So actually what that tells me is that round needs to go in first in order for this rib to look correct. So I'm going to cancel out of this for a second, cancel out of that. And then I'm going to put in that round first. I try and save my rounds till the end because they tend to cause a lot of problems if I have to change something during my design. But this one definitely needs to go in first. So the size of this rib is, or this round is 0.125. And if I hold control, I'm going to put it there and there. Make sure to hold control. Make sure you have one set. That's very, very important. And then we're going to hit the checkbox. Now let's go put that rib in. So let's go back to rib, profile rib. Let's pick that right datum plane. And now I can go and set those references. I can do that by either clicking up here or just right-clicking references. And I'm going to add the top because that's where my rib lines up with. My rib also is going to line up with the connection of those 2 points, so the intersection there. I'm going to add this bottom, add this little arc, and I'm also going to add this. I may only need the arc, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to hit close, and then I'm going to take a line. I'm going to say the rib starts from there, comes down, and is tangent to this arc here. And I can do that a couple different ways. So if I actually move along the arc, eventually it's going to snap and give me that little tangent constraint. Then I can click. And then I'm just going to middle click to get out of that a couple times. And just hit OK. And what's going to happen is it's going to take that line and it's going to project it inward towards my part. And it's going to fill everywhere inside that line. You can see why I had to put that round in. If I had the square part, what I would end up with is a round that comes up to this and then stops. Okay? And I wouldn't have this portion down here. I apologize for the bell. It's very loud. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to set my thickness for my rib. Which if I look at my piece, my thickness is 3/8, so this is going to be 0.375. And then just so you understand how to use ribs, if I had something where I had some features over here, I could flip the direction of the rib. Obviously I don't, so now the rib can't calculate. I can also flip where the thickness is applying. Okay, so right now by default in mid planes where it goes half one way, half the other, I can click it and go to one side, go to the other side, or I can go back to the middle, which is what we want. Okay, so now I'm going to middle click to say okay. I've got my rib in there. All right, and now what I can do is I can right click that rib and I can pattern it, make it an axis pattern, turn on my axes, pick my center axis. And I'm going to say there's 3 right up here. And I'm going to flip this where it goes from 90 degrees to spread around 360. And you see what happens now. It's spreading that. Previously it was 90, so it was going 90, then 90. If I hit this, now it's going to separate that and do the math. 3 into 360, there's 120 degrees between each of these dots. So now when I hit the checkbox, I have my 3 ribs, which is good. I could put my rounds in now, but I'm going to put the holes in first. Okay, so let's take the hole and we're going to say this hole is going to be drilled into this surface. So we're going to click that surface, and then I'm going to go under my placement tab because I need to change how my hole is placed. I'm going to switch this from linear to diameter. And then I need two things for a diameter. This is like a circular pattern. So I'm going to drag this to my axis, and I'm going to drag the other one to this plane. And I'm going to say the diameter, and I'll let you know what it is 3.125. The angle is going to be 0 because I want it to line right up with that plane right there. Okay, so that's a 0 degrees. Then what I need to do is I have a counter bore on this thing, so I'm going to hit standard hole, and I'm going to turn on a counter bore. That's going to add my counter bore in. Then I can go to shape, and I need to put in the right numbers for this. So this drawing says I have a 3/8 hole, or 375. It has a 3/4 counter bore, so 0.75, and I'm just hitting the shape tab, by the way, to customize the counter bore. The counter bore itself goes 5/16 deep, so 0.313, and my hole itself, I could change it here or change it here, goes all the way through. Okay, so it goes through all. All right, and you can see I can see all my dimensions there. Everything's all defined, so I can middle click to say OK. Now I'm going to do the same thing I did with the ribs. Right click, pattern, axis pattern, click the axis, change it to 3 of them, and then hit that to spread it around 3. And now I'll get my holes right in between. One thing that I should show you is if you're editing this and you put your hole in and it's in the wrong location, we can actually flip some things. So if you wanted to flip this over to the other end, which we don't, I can flip things around here, or what I could do is I could actually change my angle to be 180, and that's going to move it down there. Okay, we're going to keep it where it was. All right, so now I have one more hole. There's a little hole. It looks like maybe it's for, no, it's just a drill. Maybe it's a vent hole, something like that. Maybe it's a oil lubrication hole or something. But that hole is right here. It's a small 3/8 hole. And is located from the top. So I'm going to pick hole. I'm going to pick right on this surface, which is going to create a tangent hole. Make sure this still it says 3/8. All right. Now I need to move my references to a couple places. First place, this top surface right here. And actually, let me do that another way just to show you the other way you can do it. I could hit placement, click in my offset references right here, and then hold Control and click that surface. That would do it that way. And then I could hold Control instead of dragging this and pick that plane there as well, because it needs to know not only how far down is it, but where is it along the angle around the circle. So my angle is going to be 0. The axial distance is 1.25. And then the only other thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change my depth, because this is a, it looks like some type of lubrication hole. It needs to break through, so I can put my grease gun in there and, you know, maybe grease up like a bearing or something, or some type of surface, and then stop. So it needs to not go past like it is right now. So I'm going to hit this, pull down, and I'm going to switch right here to drill up to next surface. That'll make it drill through and then stop once it breaks into the bore. So I'm going to hit my middle button or checkbox, say I'm done. That'll put that hole in. Now all I have left are my 1/16 radii. So I'm going to hit round. All right. And actually one thing that I like to do is if I have a pattern, one of the best things you can do is if you have a pattern where you have these shared rounds on it, you want to figure out where was my first pattern instance. And there's multiple ways I could do that. But our first was down here. I know that because that's the first rib we created. So let's put the rounds on either side of the rib. So pick that side and hold Control. Pick the other side. Switch it to 1/16, 0.063. All right. And then hit the checkbox to say, okay, I know we need these on the other ribs, but I'm going to show you the shortcut here. So once I put those in, let's say I had 100 of these ribs, it would be really annoying to go around and click, 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 you know, 200 times, because there'd be 2 for every rib. So once I apply it to that first rib, I'm going to right click, I'm going to pattern, and because it references a part that's already patterned, it's going to offer me a reference pattern. All right, and depending on what type of setup you have, you can actually even change reference type. So if you pattern on a pattern, you can reference a pattern, you can reference a feature, all sorts of different things. We're going to leave it on feature by default because I can't change it because there's no other patterns. And you can see it's previewing, it's going to apply it up here, it's going to apply it up here. Here's my original. I know that because there's not a dot in the middle. All right, I can't turn off my original. I can actually turn these off by just clicking those dots. All right, so now I can hit OK, and it's going to apply those rounds to the other locations as well. Now if I move this back, turn off all my stuff, you can see I have completed the entire part, all right, in only a handful of features, and it's very, very easy to edit this thing because of the way that we created it.